Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar here with Haiku. I'm super excited about our session today, Wake Up Your Backups. You've probably heard a few things about this announcement, and we want to dive a little bit deeper today into why we are here today to talk about Haiku aiR and really change the dynamic of backup technology and how we think about it from, something that's a kind of an insurance dynamic to an operational asset that you can use every day. So today's webinar is going to be a very quick 20-minute webinar. We're going to make sure that within 20 minutes, you have a great understanding of exactly why we're here today. For those who are just joining, the session is being recorded. You have access to the recording and the slide deck after the webinar. So any questions that you have, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. And although we're going to do a rapid fire session today, I will make sure to personally email anyone an answer to their question. And if I am able to see it in the Q&A panel, I will also address it live as well. But with that being said, I think we're all getting settled in. I hope you have your coffee, but I'm very excited and grateful for the time and the session for the next 20 minutes. My name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the GM of AI and Cyber here at Haiku. And it's a very exciting time for all of us, and especially, with what we're doing today. But just to take a step back before we get right into the topic, for those who are thinking, well, maybe I've heard of Haiku before, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Haiku stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. We have been protecting thousands of organizations across the globe, and organizations have trusted us with the crown jewels of their environment. So we protect every major infrastructure and workload that you know and trust, and we have key investments in both customers in the federal space and on the commercial side who trust Haiku with their data and their crown jewels. But what I want to dive in a little bit into, it's we're all seeing very rapid changes. The change rate in technology today, specifically with AI, is shell shocking, and it's something that it's very important, especially for those of us who are responsible for data protection within IT in the organization. But what even before AI, what I want to talk about is even before ChatGPT's first announcement, there was already a lot of risk in these heterogeneous environments that organizations had. And what I mean by that is go back 15, 20 years ago. Perhaps you were managing a data center, a couple colo facilities, but you were the king or the queen of that castle, right? Everything was a monolith. You had physical machines, virtual applications, and everything was hosted and existed in those uniform instances. And so if there was ever an incident, if there was anything that happened to any application, you had the ability to remediate, you had uniform backup and recovery solutions, you had everything in one single place. The moment that most systems of record started to mainly position themselves as SaaS providers, then all of a sudden you had to start moving from a self-hosted environment to a SaaS application as well. And at the same time, your organization was also adopting public cloud use cases, probably at the beginning from a storage perspective for a couple of adjacencies. But then all of a sudden, you sit here even 2 years ago, and probably every single one of us has some form of a multi-cloud infrastructure. Every single one of us has a deep stack of SaaS applications that we all rely on, whether it's for a Git repository, whether knowledge management, whether file shares, it doesn't matter. That we sat in a world where there's already a ton of risk in heterogeneous environments. And most of that data was completely unprotected and still is today, by the way. Then we walk in today and you still have this heterogeneous environment. You have an incredible amount of change in these applications, whether these are new applications that you're adopting, some are dying, some are being replaced. But there's two key dynamics. You're either allowing the use of AI copilots and agents inside of these applications, or you are building your own systems as well, leveraging a lot of these applications as a system of record. And what's very interesting about it today was, 3 or 4 years ago, the industry started to realize that, hey, this shared responsibility model that we follow in Microsoft 365, it also reflects on every other SaaS application that we know and trust. And we haven't been protecting and recovering that data, whether it's in GitHub, whether it's in Atlassian, whether it's in Salesforce. And the reality is that, the most unprotected data asset in your organization today is still your SaaS applications. Regardless of how many they are in your organization, you have many, and you have many of those that are critical tier one applications that not only your customers, but your employees and your business rely on. And those very applications that are completely unprotected are the playground for AI. What I mean by that is every single one of these services has a form of a copilot, an agent, or a series of agents that have read and write permissions on top of these applications. And so in the past, when we talked through scenarios with customers around, hey, here are the key failure modes that you have to watch out for and that you have to prove that you can recover, right? For example, in GitHub, whether somebody was, the wrong command function, whether it was an insider threat, whether it's simply a old school deletion, these were things that you had to plan for. Today, many people don't even know what they have to plan for anymore because they don't even know the scope of what an agent can do. And so what we're sitting here is you have your most unprotected data set, your SaaS applications with the most new, volatile, incredible, powerful, inspiring, and terrifying technology that you have available to you. And those are the applications where you're seeing a lot of the innovation in your organization. Not on your virtual machines, not on your file shares, but your Git repos, your CRMs, your systems of record that live in SaaS. And what we've seen already is a very, very interesting dynamic at play here, where you're already seeing many scenarios, mostly unpredictable. All of them seem to be edge cases across very different use cases, and all of a sudden, you're sitting on a pretty significant amount of risk. What I mean by that is think about it. You have the ability for every single one of your developers, for example, in GitHub, to have an agent that allows them to push and innovate at a scale that was not possible in the past. And that agent has the same permissions as your developers. And many times it looks like it's your developer who's doing these activities as well. The reality is that all of these applications are still completely unprotected. So that's one angle, right? Where your organization is relying or leveraging, and there's a ton of value in doing so, these AI co-pilots that exist inside of the applications. Atlassian has Rovo, Salesforce has Agentforce, ServiceNow has Fabric. There's so many other of these that exist that are incredible value. We all use them. And you need to make sure that you understand what are the possible failure modes that I have inside of that, and how can I make sure that my data is protected? Because at the end of the day, the difference that we exist in your SaaS apps today is that data can be modified, deleted, exposed at machine speed. It's no longer a human performing a bunch of functions and then maybe deleting a couple of key objects and assets. It's an agent being able to do so at machine speed. We are not ready for this world, especially because the applications that are being affected are the most unprotected asset in your organization. And what's super interesting as well is that it's not only the ability to use copilots, especially the larger your organization is, you already probably have people in your organization whose entire job is around AI innovation. And what you're noticing is that these SaaS applications themselves, they're essentially becoming a backend for these agents. So whether your organization has Salesforce or ServiceNow or many of these other applications, all of a sudden they're essentially a database or a system of record. And there's so many workflows and agents and access layers on top of that that people are starting to really build out new tool sets, new workflows, and achieve an incredible amount of value. But guess what? That core application, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's Jira, whether it's any GitHub, is so critical to be able to protect. And so what we're noticing was in the past, you had this rise of heterogeneous environments where you had hybrid multi-cloud SaaS. You were doing an excellent job of protecting hybrid cloud. There's excellent native tools that you could at least protect in some form your public cloud. And then you had no protection for SaaS applications beyond Microsoft 365. And so we live in a moment now where everyone has a little bit of time to be able to start protecting these applications before it's too late. But what I want to talk to as well is, the conversation that we're having today applies to an enterprise, a Fortune 10, and it also applies to a mid-market and even applies to an SMB. But what I really want to focus on is, especially if you're listening in the room right now and your organization, you're a mid-market CIO, right? Healthcare firm, 4,000 employees, you have a ton of responsibility. Your technology stack, your data stack looks like an enterprise. It's as diverse as an enterprise, but you don't have the war chest or the people to address a lot of these cases. And on the enterprise side as well, that doesn't mean this discussion isn't for you, because there's very specific challenges that come with these SaaS applications as well. But there's a lot of pain there's a lot of struggle in being a mid-market CIO right now, because your budget is on the IT side, on cyber or on data protection side, is not growing. it's being reallocated in many cases. You have a limited amount of people and a limited amount of time, but the scope of what you have to protect is almost as challenging as an enterprise organization. And think about that. You have your hybrid cloud workloads, you have multi-cloud technologies, you have SaaS. You're somehow responsible for making sure that the organization is safely and effectively and compliant using these SaaS applications. And you're being tasked with also provisioning and helping build the infrastructure of AI workflows within your organization. These are enterprise level capabilities. It's going to bring incredible amount of competitive value to your organization, but it also brings a lot of risk and a lot of strain. And what I really want to address, and this is specifically for today's topic, is this massive gap that exists today, where beyond Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, everyone here has either Workspace or Microsoft 365, and you have Microsoft Purview or Google's equivalent. And so you have a good understanding of the data inside Microsoft. Hey, who's emailing who? What's happening? Is there anything at risk? Even at the DLP level, you have those capabilities in Microsoft, and you have them in Workspace. Where you don't have them is in all of the other SaaS applications that your organization is using, especially if you're in the mid-market. Maybe in the enterprise, you've been able to procure and deploy a series of DSPM and governance tools, but in the mid-market, it's a very, very challenging concept. And so they're basic questions that it's very difficult for you to answer in the mid-market. Where do I have sensitive data outside of Microsoft? For example, Confluence is one of the largest data stores of sensitive data in the world, especially for healthcare and financial services. What are you hosting there? What are people adding to it? It essentially becomes an internal repository for the organization. What kind of sensitive data is there? Is there somebody in your organization who's performing mass exfil on certain applications? Do you have the time and the resources to look at the logs of that specific application and understand, hey, is this person performing something that's malicious? Is this part of their day to day? It's hard to know. You have an entire world where all of this is heavily configured and it's very difficult to manage drift. And from an insider threat perspective, it's pretty much a Hail Mary. And so the core focus of today's conversation is addressing this massive, massive gap that exists in the industry. Where, yes, if you're in the Fortune 100, you have the ability to go and procure a solution that allows you to solve for every one of these problems, or at least attempt to solve for every one of these problems. And then you start to stack because every organization has, an XDR, an EDR, a SIEM, you have your identities, you have data protection, you have core cloud security. But then there's so many fragmented use cases that you have to go and supplement. And in the enterprise, you might have the budget, you might have the people, and you might not actually in certain cases. But in the mid-market, you definitely do not. And so the goal today is how do we provide value? How do we extract existing data in our organizations to be able to answer these questions in a way that's cost effective, in a way that's reasonable, especially because you've already paid for these assets? And that's why I want to talk a little bit about backup. And backup is in a very, very interesting space now. I think 2 or 3 years from now, when we're having another discussion, we're never going to talk about backup in the context of, hey, assign your backup policies, have the 3-2-1 rule, make sure that you can recover testing. All that stuff is table stakes. That's the fundamentals, the basics. If you don't do that, you're not a data protection company. It's all going to become around how do we use this historical data set that your organization has? And how do you use it to protect your organization, to understand your organization, and make sure that you're compliant and make sure that you have a good understanding of your posture? So I want to walk you through a couple of things here. So a few years ago, we noticed that there was a massive gap in SaaS data protection. And the reality was that, if you're a top backup company, you had your hands full with virtual machines. You then had to go and build public cloud infrastructure backup. And then you had to make a decision of what other SaaS applications you wanted to protect. So you had to go and hire a product manager to find a market and say, hey, Microsoft 365, we should build a backup. We can make money there. Hey, Salesforce, we should build a backup. We can make money there. But what this created was this massive gap where there's 30,000 SaaS apps out there. The industry was only protecting 2 or 3 at the time. And what we noticed was this massive gap was very, very dangerous for organizations. So we built our cloud development platform, and we were able to scale and start to protect a lot of these applications that were orphaned from the data protection companies. The GitHubs of the world, the Jiras of the world, the Asanas, the DocuSigns, all of these types of critical applications that nobody was protecting. And as we started to really scale, we have over 100 workloads today, we started to notice that the nature of a SaaS backup is completely different. What do I mean by that? When you take a backup of a SaaS application, because it's so API rich, because it's so different from a virtual machine, you have the ability to back up logs, to understand metadata, to back up config, to back up files. And of course, you're doing this incrementally. You can start to observe changes. So you get a real understanding. You essentially almost build via backup a flight recorder of that application. You can understand, hey, who touched this file? How did this permission change? How was this record or when was this record modified? And how was this configuration adjusted or moved or deleted? All of this exists in this kind of black box of backup, especially when you build the right type of backup and recovery for SaaS applications. And so the question is, though, historically, none of you have had a blast of protecting backup or purchasing backup technologies. It's not something we all think about, right? And I'm in data protection, no hard feelings. It's you've always thought about it as insurance. You thought about it as, hey, you know, I need to be able to protect this. I need to prove from a compliance perspective that we're following the 3-2-1 rule. I need to prove retention. We'll do a yearly recovery test, and we're good. And that was the world of backup. But imagine if all of that data, whether it's in one application like GitHub or across all of your applications, what if you could start to ask it questions? What if you treat it like a genie and really start to understand, hey, what did this person do? What changed in this application? Is there sensitive data there? Can I go? All of these are very expensive questions to answer because there's, single point tools devoted to solving for this. But these are new assets, new deployments, new contracts, new integrations that you have to perform that in the enterprise take a while, don't always give you all the context, and in the mid market are simply not attainable from an economics perspective. I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here. In your backup data, you have the ability to scan for sensitive data. So you can say, hey, do I have passport numbers? Do I have any form of PHI in Confluence or in SharePoint or in DocuSign? Well, you would. And you don't really have a way to check unless you go and procure a solution that does that data classification. But it's in your backup. It lives there. It exists there. So it's very critical to understand. One other key piece here is in your organization, you're most likely using multiple identity providers. You have Entra ID, you have Okta, you have federated SaaS identities inside of these applications. You might have great governance within one tool, but it's very hard to understand how all of those tools are being used and how all of your identity, your roles, your permissions, your policies are drifting. And there are tools out there that help you do that. Once again, there are additional tools that you have to purchase and deploy to do that. But guess what? A lot of that data lives in your backup. And I'll give you another example. There are key scenarios that are very, very difficult for people to understand, even for insider risk solutions. And it's to say, hey, this employee, maybe HR knocked on your door and said, hey, we need to investigate this employee, or there's an offboarding policy. Hey, did this employee grant themselves access? Did they export something that they shouldn't? This is once again another solution, another tool, another purchase. Once again, this exists in your backups, and more importantly, in this case than ever, it exists in the history of those backups. So you can start to really baseline because you have a rich, immutable history. It's not like a security tool. It's saying, "Hey, this is happening right now. You should go take a look." I have no context to why, but you should take a look. And that's where you get a lot of fatigue. But in backup technology, the confidence intervals are so much higher because, hey, you know, John or Sally has always done this. We don't think it's a big deal. Or, hey, John and Sally have never done this. This is a new application. And all of a sudden, they've exported thousands of files. These are critical contexts that your organization has always had in your backup data, especially if you're backing up SaaS, yet you've never been able to use it. And so, our goal and our charter here is to make sure that one, we can continue protecting more and more applications. Because the reality of this is we're all talking about AI, we're having deep conversations about the risk of AI, but you lived in a world of risk even before AI. And there are, tier one SaaS applications in your organization right now that you're not protecting. Maybe you're assuming the vendor is doing so. Maybe you're assuming that, a recycle bin will suffice. But whether it's your Git repository, your knowledge systems, HR software, it doesn't matter. There are applications in there that are not protected. So even before they were touching AI copilots, even before read-write permissions, even before the open cloud frenzy, you had an incredible amount of risk. And so it's important to understand that beyond today's conversation, table stakes is whether it's with HYCU or not, you have to protect your SaaS applications. But then it becomes, well, okay, you're protecting your SaaS applications. Your application owners, they're not backup people. They have a very different relationship with assets that you purchase for them backup. And so the whole goal of what we want to do and what we're doing is how do we evolve this backup, this relationship you and your organization have with backup from life insurance to healthcare, to an asset, to value that you can use every single day. And what's very critical and only possible here is because of the broad context that HYCU can protect within your organization. We have over 100 workloads that are protected in our marketplace, applications that nobody else protects, whether that's Jira, whether that's Box, whether that's DocuSign, whether it's Notion, GitLab, you name it. These are all critical systems of record that people are not protecting in your organization today. But because all of this exists in the control plane, because of what we've done to help you protect your workloads, you have the ability to start learning and gleaning insights from that data in a way that you can't from other backup vendors because they simply don't protect it. So they might tell you, hey, we've acquired a DSPM solution. Hey, we're providing this value and this integration for you. But guess what? It's a separate line item. It's a separate deployment. It's still touching your SaaS data. And if it tells you that something's wrong in GitHub, but you can't protect GitHub, then what's the point if you can't recover GitHub, right? So the whole goal here is that today's conversation is only possible because of the broad context pool and the broad set of applications that we can protect. And that's where HYCU aiR came from. It's from how do we give you more value for something that you definitely have to protect, but you're also dealing with so many other challenges in your organization. Data protection is just one line item of the many challenges that you have today around identity governance, around drift, around DSPM. These are all major gaps in organizations today and major gaps that are not being filled in the mid-market. And how do you use backup data to be able to accomplish that? And so what I'm going to show you here is just a quick view of how you're able to do that with HYCU aiR. And what you're able to do with HYCU aiR is pool your backup data together and start to query and start to learn from one application or all of the applications that you're learning. So what I'm showing you here now is going to be a view of, for example, an insider risk view, which is, hey, I need to know what this person is doing across these applications, and I need to know what kind of data they touched. Show me their behavior. And what you're able to see then is essentially an agent, and with a natural language approach, being able to go and define exactly what this person has done. What have they touched? What have they modified? What have they exported? All this data lives inside of your backups. And then you're able to, once again, not just gain this insights that you haven't had before, but also be able to even automate the reporting of this, which is really, really critical here. And so the point here is that customers don't have the information, and then they have to spend a lot of time putting this report and logs together. The goal is your backup data has all of it. How do we give you information that you don't have? And then how do we help you understand exactly what's happening? And what's very critical about this is what's your recovery posture as well. That is very, very critical. It's not just about saying, hey, something is wrong. It's about saying, hey, something's wrong. Here's what was affected. Here's the objects that you can immediately go and recover. And that's one query. One query is essentially one solution that you would go and procure. There's so many other use cases as well. For example, show me all sensitive data within one application. Help me scan that backup in a way that's way more cost effective than procuring a full data classification solution as well. And so the point here is how do we leverage this backup data to deliver adjacencies across the space? And somebody asked a very important question. Who's your target market for this? Well, the real target market for this is, if you're a mid-market CIO, if you're an enterprise CIO, you're going to get different value from your backup data. And what you're seeing here is this template marketplace where only you know exactly what you want to find out inside of this backups, where you can create your own template, your own agent, and start to really understand how to be able to leverage data in GitHub, in Box, or across the scope. And what's important about this is what you in an enterprise want to find out might be explicit anomalies in an application. You have thousands of developers, you want to identify change rate, you want to identify agent behavior. These are things that you can do. In the mid-market, you might not have access to data classification, so you want to go and identify sensitive data. This applies and scales up and down to your organization, but the nature of the queries that you're going to apply are going to be very, very different. And that's the point. When you allow natural language interaction with your backup, when you allow and uncover this flight recorder, this black box, and combine it with AI, you get an incredible amount of value to be able to get and glean more insights than just being able to recover. And that's the whole concept of HYCU aiR. It's how do you get more value of an asset that you have today that has information that no one else has. And that's what we're incredibly proud of. So what I want to mention here is this is an early access. We have customers who are joining our wait list. We are onboarding customers, getting your feedback. So anyone who's interested, when we do these sessions, we make sure that the insights, the queries that you can drive are going to be something of value to your organization. So I'm going to leave the QR code here so that you're able to check it out. Even if you want to have an exploratory conversation with myself or other folks on the product team, we're more than happy to do so. Because what I will say this is, many times in your organization, some insight's going to pop up or a question's going to pop up, and you're going to realize that backup data could have helped you do so. So we're here to answer those questions. We're here to drive. But I wanted to thank you all for your time and for your attention today. There's going to be much more announcements around this, many more use cases. I'm super excited. I hope that you find this interesting, and we're humbled that you took the time today to learn about HYCU aiR. So I want to thank you all for your time. If you answer this poll question, whether you want to learn more first or you want to be added to the wait list, we will be reaching out to you directly to make sure that we can show you way more and then get your insights and make sure that you can get much more value from your backup data. So I want to thank you all for your time, for your attention. The session's recorded. You'll have access to it right after we finish. So have a great day, and thank you for your time today.